I am Nathan. I am 28 years old. Just 4 years ago, my own mother sent a brutal text message to our family group chat, officially disowning me and banning me from Mother's Day dinner because I was a factory worker. While I was covered in industrial grease, working grueling 10-hour shifts to help pay off her debts, she told my siblings that my life choices were too embarrassing to recognize. She publicly humiliated me in front of everyone I grew up with. But there was a massive secret my mother and my siblings did not know. That blue-collar job she despised was about to hand me a life-altering promotion, a massive senior executive salary, and the kind of corporate power that would leave my family begging for my mercy. Right now, as I record this, that same woman is standing downstairs in the pouring rain, crying outside my office building, desperately trying to get past security. Before I tell you exactly how I turned my mother's ultimate betrayal into the greatest victory of my life, please hit that like button if you believe in real justice and karma. And do me a favor, drop a comment below letting me know what city or state you are watching this from. Now, let us go back to the exact night where the glass shattered and everything began. When I tell people in our town that I work at the local manufacturing plant, their faces almost always do this identical, awkward little twitch. It is a microscopic flinch of the eyes and lips. It is the exact same look people give you when you tell them you do dental work with a rusty spoon. They look down at your boots, scramble for words, and then they say something like, "Oh well, that is honest work, Nathan." They say it in the exact same condescending tone you would use to describe a street magician who eats rusted nails for lunch out of pure desperation. But the absolute truth is, I genuinely liked what I did. I knew exactly what time I clocked in every morning. I knew exactly what I was building. I fixed real, tangible, physical problems with my bare hands and a wrench. I was not sitting in a cubicle, aimlessly moving decimal points back and forth across a spreadsheet while pretending that my massive caffeine addiction was a substitute for a real personality. It was the Friday evening right before Mother's Day. I had just completed a brutal, back-breaking 10-hour shift on the primary assembly line. My lower back was throbbing, my forearms were aching from lifting heavy steel components, and my hands were deeply stained with a thick layer of industrial lubricant and carbon dust that no amount of orange pumice soap could ever fully remove. My steel-toed boots felt like they weighed 50 pounds each as I climbed the creaking stairs to my small, drafty one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. I tossed my truck keys onto the worn kitchen counter, kicked off my boots by the door, and threw a plastic bowl of leftover pasta into the microwave. It was a pathetic, lonely dinner for a 24-year-old guy, but I was simply too physically exhausted to care about anything else. As the microwave hummed its loud, monotonous tune in the quiet apartment, my phone pinged on the counter. It was a notification from the family WhatsApp group. The group chat was titled Gentry Family Bond. My mother had created it years ago, a title that always felt incredibly ironic given the cold reality of how we lived. I wiped a stray smear of grease off my thumb against my jeans and unlocked the glowing screen. The message was from my mother, Brenda. It was short, sharp, and perfectly poisoned like a needle hidden inside a velvet cushion. Happy Mother's Day dinner, Sunday at 6 p.m. at the Oakwood Grill. The text read, I am so incredibly proud of all my children who have worked so hard and truly succeeded in life. You all are what makes being a mother worth it. You bring me so much joy and give me a reason to hold my head high at our church brunches. Then she explicitly listed them out one by one like a roll call of honor. Gavin, my brilliant doctor and cardiologist. Monica, my genius software engineer. Fiona, my amazing marketing manager. That was the end of the text. There was no mention of my name. No Nathan. No love you all. Just a blank, cold space where my name should have been. It was a digital slap across the face, delivered in front of everyone. But my mother was not finished yet. Before I could even fully process the omission, the typing bubbles appeared again. She added a second message right underneath the list of her golden children. The words felt like frozen steel. Some choices are simply too embarrassing to include in a family celebration. She wrote, I no longer recognize or validate anyone who chooses manual factory work over true ambition and higher education. This formal dinner is strictly reserved for my successful children who have made something of themselves. Do not show up if you do not fit the criteria. I stood completely frozen in the middle of my dark kitchen. I read those sentences once. Then I read them a second time. I read them 5 times over, staring at the screen until the text began to blur, half wondering if the weld fumes from the manufacturing floor had finally damaged my brain and caused a vivid hallucination. The microwave behind me gave a loud, obnoxious beep, signaling that my pasta was done, but I could not move my legs. My biological mother had just publicly disowned me. She had banned me from a family holiday via a text message in a group chat with my brother and sisters. She took 24 years of my life, my absolute loyalty, and my quiet, unseen financial sacrifices, and she completely erased them with a few casual taps of her perfectly manicured fingers. I stood there holding my breath, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, waiting for the counter-response. I waited for Gavin, the great medical professional, to step up and tell our mother she was being completely unhinged. I waited for Monica, who always talked about corporate ethics and kindness, to defend her brother. I waited for Fiona, my little sister, the one whose tears I used to wipe away when she was a scared kid, to text back and say, "Mom, stop, you forgot Nathan." The silence that followed in that digital chat room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that screamed at me in all caps. But the worst part of that night was not the silence of my siblings. The worst part was what they chose to do next. Gavin broke the silence first. He did not call her out. He simply posted a single thumbs-up emoji. Monica typed a response immediately after him. "Can't wait for Sunday. See you at 6, Mom." Fiona finished the sequence by dropping a stupid, animated sticker of a bright yellow dancing flower. They all agreed with her. They were all completely fine with tossing me out into the garbage like an expired carton of milk, simply because keeping me around ruined the pristine, wealthy, country club narrative they liked to project to the world. To them, my existence was nothing more than a dark smudge on the glass window of their perfect lives, and my mother had finally taken the glass cleaner and wiped it away for good. I stared at the bowl of pasta, then back at the little green chat bubbles on my phone, and then at the ridiculous dancing flower sticker. For a fraction of a second, a wave of pure, blinding heat rushed through my veins. I wanted to type out a massive, furious essay. I wanted to scream into the microphone. I wanted to list every single dollar I had ever handed over to them. I wanted to demand the basic human respect that any stranger on the street would give me. But then, an entirely different feeling took over. It was a sudden, freezing wave of absolute clarity. I looked at the phone and realized that trying to argue with an arrogant, narcissistic parent who measures her love for her children by their job titles is completely useless. It is like trying to teach a concrete wall how to sing. You will only end up with bloody knuckles, a torn throat, and absolutely nothing to show for it. I was suddenly, completely done expecting them to change. I was done begging for a seat at a dinner table where the cost of admission was my own self-respect. I did not type a furious reply. I did not text back a sarcastic remark. I did not react at all. Instead, I calmly tapped on the group chat settings. I hit the button that said delete and exit group. Then I went directly into my contact list. I pulled up Brenda Gentry and I hit block. I pulled up Gavin, block. I pulled up Monica, block. I pulled up Fiona, block. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. I took my hot bowl of pasta out of the microwave, walked over to my small wooden table, and I sat down and ate my dinner. The apartment was completely quiet. It was the first time in my entire life that I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. I did not know it at the time, but that horrific text message was actually the greatest gift my mother had ever handed me. It freed me from the prison of her expectations. I thought that was the absolute lowest point of my family's cruelty. I was so incredibly wrong. To truly understand how a biological mother can completely discard her own son over a blue-collar job, you have to look at the deeply rotten soil that our family tree was planted in. My mother's cruelty did not just materialize out of nowhere on that Friday night before Mother's Day. It was the culmination of years of calculated neglect and toxic family dynamics. Let us rewind the clock 5 years before that text message arrived. I was 19 years old. It was a miserable, freezing Tuesday afternoon in the middle of November. The sky was the color of wet asphalt, and the rain felt like thousands of tiny needles biting into my skin. We were standing in a bleak cemetery on the edge of the county, burying my father, Victor. My dad was a remarkably quiet, gentle soul. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He spent exactly 30 consecutive years working at the local manufacturing plant in town, the very same factory I would later join. He came home every single night of his life smelling like a mixture of heavy motor oil, metallic dust, sweat, and cheap Menon aftershave. He was the man who taught me how to use a socket wrench, how to properly wire an electrical outlet, and how to find practical solutions to real problems. He always told me that the world has too many people who just talk. Nathan, you need to be a man who actually builds things. He was the only person in that house who ever looked at me with genuine warmth. My mother, Brenda, absolutely despised his line of work. She was completely consumed by social status and external appearances. She lived her life entirely for the approval of her homeowners association meetings, her country club lunacies, and the desperate need to prove to the wealthy neighbors that the Gentry family was superior. My father's calloused hands and dirty fingernails were a constant source of quiet humiliation for her. She treated him like an embarrassing paycheck that she had to endure. At the funeral service, Gavin, who was then in his very first year of elite medical school, kept blatantly checking his gold watch. He actually leaned over to my mother while the minister was speaking and whispered that he had a massive cardiology exam the next morning and needed the service to wrap up quickly so he could drive back to campus. Monica was completely detached, hiding under her black umbrella while scrolling through corporate emails on her phone. Fiona was whining continuously about how the cemetery mud was going to permanently ruin her expensive leather boots. I was the only person who refused to leave the graveside. I stood there alone in the freezing rain, watching the cemetery workers lower my father's casket into the cold earth long after the rest of my family had already walked back to their warm cars. Exactly 1 week after the funeral, we all gathered in a small, wood-paneled office downtown to meet with an estate lawyer. My mother sat in her designer black dress, practically vibrating with anticipation. She fully expected a massive life insurance policy payout and a substantial inheritance. She had already spent the previous 3 days loudly discussing how she was going to use the money to completely gut and renovate her kitchen and buy a new car. The lawyer looked at us over his glasses, pulled out a thick stack of financial documents, and dropped a devastating bomb on the room. There was no inheritance. There was no life insurance money left. My father had been secretly taking out massive personal loans and draining his 401k for the past 7 years just to quietly pay off my mother's astronomical credit card debts and fund Gavin's incredibly expensive off-campus luxury apartment and tuition. The entire estate was deeply in debt. In fact, the lawyer told us flatly that the family home, the real estate my mother cherished above all else, was facing immediate foreclosure by the bank within 90 days if someone did not start paying the massive monthly mortgage immediately. At that exact moment, I had a full-ride academic scholarship waiting for me at the state university. My bags were packed, and I was supposed to leave for college in less than 2 months to study engineering. I sat there and looked across the table at my older brother. I can't possibly drop out or take a gap year from medical school, Gavin said immediately, crossing his arms and scoffing. My future as a surgeon is far too critical to the family name. Nathan, you and Mom are just going to have to find a way to figure this out. Monica chimed in next, claiming she was just a low-earning junior intern at her tech firm and couldn't contribute a single dollar toward the mortgage without ruining her own financial plan. I looked at my mother's pale, panicked face. Despite her flaws, she was my mother, and the memory of my father was still fresh in my heart. I knew what my dad would have done. He would have protected the family. So, I made a choice that changed the entire course of my life. The next morning, I walked into the financial aid office at the university, formally canceled my college fund allocation, and officially surrendered my full-ride scholarship. 2 hours later, I drove down to the manufacturing plant, walked directly into the hiring manager's office, and signed a contract to take over my dad's old position on the assembly line as an entry-level factory worker. You would think that a mother would be profoundly grateful to a 19-year-old son who willingly sacrificed his entire college education and career path to save her from losing her real estate and becoming homeless. You would think she would hold my hand and thank me for taking on that burden. But narcissists do not feel gratitude. They only feel entitlement. The very first evening, I walked through the front door of the family house wearing my father's old navy blue factory uniform with the name Gentry stitched over the pocket. Brenda looked at me with utter disgust. It was the exact look you give someone who has just tracked wet mud all over a clean living room rug. "This is absolutely disgraceful, Nathan," she snapped, refusing to even look me in the eye as she poured herself a glass of wine. "This is not what your father wanted for this family. You are dragging us down. I am literally paying the mortgage that keeps this roof over your head." "Mom," I said, my voice incredibly tired, "I am the only reason the bank hasn't evicted you. You are embarrassing me to death," she shot back, her voice rising in anger. "What am I supposed to tell my friends at the Sunday brunch? That my youngest son is a grease monkey who sweeps factory floors? Gavin is going to be a brilliant cardiac specialist. Monica is climbing the corporate ladder. And you? You are a walking blemish on our family's reputation." From that specific day forward, I became a complete ghost inside my own childhood home. I was the sole financial backbone keeping the house secure, but socially, I was treated like a contagious disease. Whenever her wealthy friends from the neighborhood came over for drinks, my mother would explicitly order me to stay confined to my bedroom or leave the property entirely so no one would see my work clothes. She completely scrubbed my name and photos from her social media pages. If neighbors asked about me, she would vaguely lie and say I was taking an extended sabbatical to figure things out. The emotional abuse was constant, but it didn't stop there. It extended to physical and financial exploitation. During my second year at the plant, a massive summer storm rolled through our town and tore a huge section of shingles off the roof, causing water to leak directly into my mother's master bedroom. The repair quotes from local contractors were thousands of dollars. Money she simply did not have because she refused to stop her luxury shopping habits. For 3 days, she walked around the house sobbing loudly, making passive-aggressive comments about how my father had left her unprotected in a rotting house. I did not argue. I did not get angry. I simply went down to Home Depot, used my own hard-earned savings from working overtime to buy hundreds of dollars worth of roofing materials, and spent my entire weekend off up on that blistering hot roof in the 95-degree July heat. I spent 16 hours tearing my hands apart, pulling out old nails, and completely replacing the damaged section of the roof myself. When I finally climbed down the ladder on Sunday evening, sunburnt, bleeding from my knuckles, and completely dehydrated, my mother didn't offer me a glass of water. She didn't even say thank you. She walked out into the yard, squinted up at the roof, and sighed with deep annoyance. "The shade of those new shingles doesn't perfectly match the rest of the roof, Nathan," she said coldly. "It looks incredibly tacky from the street. The neighbors are definitely going to complain to the HOA." A year later, my little sister Fiona was preparing for her high school senior class trip to Europe. She had been bragging about it to her friends for months, but when the final payment deadline approached, my mother admitted she had spent the trip money on a luxury spa weekend for herself and couldn't cover the balance. I found Fiona sitting on the front porch steps after work, crying her eyes out because she was going to be the only kid left behind. My heart broke for her. I spent the next 2 months working brutal double shifts at the factory, sleeping less than 4 hours a night, to quietly raise the $3,000 needed to pay off her trip balance directly to the school. I did it happily because I loved my sister. 2 weeks later, Fiona posted a massive album of photos from Paris and Rome on her Facebook page. The caption under the main photo read, "Had the most magical time in Europe. I am so incredibly blessed. Thank you so much to my amazing, generous mom and my wonderful big brother Gavin for working so hard to make my dreams come true. I love you guys." Gavin had not contributed a single penny to that trip. He had been away at an upscale beach resort with his medical school friends. Yet, he commented on her post, "Anything for my favorite little sister. You deserve the world. Proud of you." I sat alone in my bedroom that night, staring at my phone screen, feeling a cold, heavy stone sink into the pit of my stomach. I never said a word to Fiona. I never demanded credit. I constantly convinced myself that true family love did not require a public billboard. I thought that if I just kept being the steady one, the reliable one who sacrificed everything in silence, they would eventually see my worth. That brings us back to the week before the Mother's Day text message. Despite years of being treated like a shameful, dirty secret, that desperate 19-year-old kid inside me still craved a tiny scrap of my mother's validation. I had managed to save up a substantial bonus from the factory for meeting a massive production quota. I walked into a high-end jewelry store at the local mall and purchased a beautiful, solid gold pendant for Brenda. Cost me nearly $600, a fortune for a guy living on hourly wages. I wrapped it perfectly in silver paper and silk ribbon, genuinely believing that when I handed it to her at the Mother's Day dinner, she would finally look at me with the same pride she reserved for Gavin. That silver box was sitting right there on my kitchen counter when her text arrived, telling me I was too embarrassing to be included in her life. Looking at that beautifully wrapped gift sitting next to my trash can that night, I finally realized the terrifying truth about toxic family dynamics. They will never love you for your sacrifices. They will only despise you for reminding them of the debts they can never repay. I picked up the $600 box and tossed it straight into the garbage disposal. I thought the emotional storm had reached its peak. I had absolutely no idea that the real betrayal was about to come from someone I actually trusted. The morning after I blocked my entire family, the sun rose over the town exactly like it always did. The world did not stop spinning because my mother had erased me. I woke up at 5:45 a.m., pulled on my grease-stained uniform, and drove my truck to the manufacturing plant. The heavy air of the factory floor, smelling of ozone, heated steel, and hydraulic fluid, felt incredibly grounding. My line manager cracked a loud joke about my messy hair looking like a pine cone, and I let out a loud, natural laugh. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of trying to please people who were fundamentally incapable of loving me. When my shift ended that evening, I drove straight back to my apartment with a singular, unyielding focus. The time for passive sadness was entirely over. It was time for a complete, systematic purge of my life. I walked into my living room holding a heavy-duty black trash bag. I walked to the mantelpiece and snatched down the framed photograph from my high school graduation. I looked closely at the image. My mother was looking away from me toward a crowd of wealthy parents, her face tight with boredom, while I stood there holding a diploma she didn't care about. I threw it into the bag. I walked to my closet and pulled down old photo albums, childhood birthday cards, and family vacation souvenirs. I threw every single item into the garbage bag. The only object I left completely untouched was the old wooden cigar box on my desk that belonged to my father. It still carried the faint scent of his tobacco and motor oil. It was the only clean memory I had left. Next came my digital existence. I didn't just log out of my social media applications. I spent 3 hours systematically deleting my Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat accounts permanently. I wanted to completely wipe my digital footprint from their world. I wanted to deny them the passive luxury of ever looking at my face through a screen again. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I was going to ensure my absence was absolute and non-negotiable. Over the next 4 days, the silence from their end was profound. There were no frantic phone calls to see if I was alive. There were no knocks on my apartment door. My brother and sisters were so entirely wrapped up in their own high society lives and the upcoming Mother's Day dinner at the Oakwood Grill that my sudden disappearance didn't even register as a minor blip on their radar. It was a cold confirmation of everything I had suspected. I was never a brother or a son to them. I was merely a utility bill they no longer had to pay. But on Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an SMS text from an unblocked number. It was my Aunt Diana, my mother's older sister. Throughout my entire childhood, Aunt Diana had always carefully maintained the public persona of the sweet, neutral, deeply spiritual matriarch of the extended family. She was the one who would always pull me aside at chaotic Thanksgiving dinners, give me a warm hug, and tell me that God had a special plan for my life, despite my difficult circumstances. Her text message looked incredibly warm and comforting on the surface. "Nathan, my dear sweet boy, I just heard from your mother about what happened with the WhatsApp group chat." Diana wrote, "My heart is absolutely breaking for you. Brenda can be so incredibly short-sighted and cruel with her words when she is stressed about appearances. Are you doing okay, sweetie? You can always talk to me about anything. Please tell me you aren't too hurt. Are you planning on coming to town this weekend? I am always here to listen to you." For a brief, vulnerable second, the lonely, rejected kid inside my chest wanted to break down. I wanted to type out a massive response to her. I wanted to pour out all the built-up pain, the exhaustion, and the absolute horror of being publicly discarded by my own mother. My thumbs were literally flying across the screen, and I had already written 3 long paragraphs detailing how much I was hurting. Before my thumb could hit the send button, my phone vibrated again with a notification. It was a direct multimedia text message from Julian, a distant cousin on my father's side who lived a few towns over. Julian was a notoriously clumsy, tech-illiterate guy who was constantly sending messages to the wrong contacts or clicking on spam links. I tapped open the message from Julian. It was an image file, a screenshot of a private Facebook Messenger group chat that included Julian, Aunt Diana, and my mother, Brenda. Julian had obviously meant to send this screenshot to his own wife to gossip, but in his usual hurried, careless manner, he had accidentally sent it directly to me. I zoomed in on the glowing text conversation between my mother and Aunt Diana, dated just 20 minutes prior. "Diana, I just texted Nathan the usual sweet talk message to see how pathetic and broken he's acting right now. Don't worry, Brenda. I'll find out if the idiot is planning to show up at the Oakwood Grill on Sunday to cause an embarrassing scene. I'll keep him distracted and talking to me so he stays put in his apartment. Brenda, my mother, thank you so much. Diana, you are a lifesaver. He is always so incredibly dramatic and desperate for attention. Let me know the second he texts you back crying so Gavin and the girls can have a good laugh about it during our appetizers on Sunday. He honestly thinks his little factory job makes him a martyr." The air completely left my lungs. I sat there in my truck in the factory parking lot, staring at the screen while a cold, lethal numbness crept from the tips of my fingers all the way to my heart. The betrayal hit me infinitely harder than my mother's original text. Aunt Diana didn't care about my well-being at all. She was an emotional spy, a snake sent into my life by my mother to gather intelligence and extract my pain so they could use it as entertainment over expensive steaks and wine. They wanted to consume my suffering like a side dish. Every single drop of sadness inside me instantly evaporated, replaced by a massive, impenetrable wall of absolute contempt. I slowly deleted the long, emotional paragraph I had spent 10 minutes writing to Diana. Instead, I took the screenshot that Julian had accidentally sent me, attached it directly to the message thread with Aunt Diana, and typed a single final response. "You are absolute garbage. Enjoy the dinner." I hit send. Before she could even attempt to type a panicked, backpedaling excuse, I blocked her number permanently. I then drove straight down to the local Verizon store, walked up to the counter, paid the administrative fee, and officially changed my actual phone number to a completely unlisted private line. I didn't notify a single cousin, aunt, or family friend. I completely severed the digital cord. I was officially dead to their world, and they were completely dead to mine. From that exact night forward, I stopped being a victim. I transformed myself into a machine of pure, silent ambition. I realized that if my family wanted to look down on me for being a factory worker, I was going to become the most dangerous, highly educated asset that manufacturing plant had ever seen. I stopped wasting time. I came home from my 10-hour shifts, bypassed the television entirely, and spent 4 hours every single night watching advanced tutorials on industrial power systems, fluid dynamics, electrical theory, and advanced mechanical design. A month later, I walked into the admissions office at the local technical college and enrolled in their night program for advanced industrial systems operations and management. I paid the tuition out of my own pocket using every single dollar of my saved overtime pay. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I would clock out of the manufacturing plant, wash the heavy industrial grease off my face in the locker room, and drive straight to campus. I sat in the back row of those classrooms in my heavy steel-toed boots, my worn factory hoodie, and my knuckles permanently stained with ink and carbon. I was surrounded by kids 10 years younger than me who looked at me like I was someone's creepy uncle visiting the class. I didn't care about their looks. I was the guy drinking bitter black coffee out of a dented thermos, taking meticulous notes until my wrists cramped. There were brutally difficult nights during those years. There were winter nights where the temperature dropped below zero. My muscles were aching from lifting heavy machinery during the day, and my eyes were burning so severely from exhaustion that I could barely read the schematics in my textbooks. There were moments where I would sit at my desk, look at my father's old cigar box, and feel an overwhelming urge to unlock my phone, call my mother, and beg for her to just love me again. But every single time my resolve began to waver, I would open that wooden box, pull out the printed copy of her Mother's Day text and the screenshot of Aunt Diana's betrayal, and look at them. The pain would immediately turn into a freezing, ironclad discipline. I wasn't working to prove my family wrong anymore. I was working to completely erase their power over my future. I was building a fortress, and I was doing it entirely in the dark. The factory floor is a living, breathing ecosystem of iron, steel, and human psychology. If you spend enough consecutive years there, you learn to read the machines better than you read people. You learn the exact pitch of a conveyor belt when a bearing is about to fail, and you learn the exact shift in atmosphere when human jealousy is about to turn toxic. By the time I entered my second full year of night school, my practical understanding of our plant's automated infrastructure had completely surpassed almost every veteran technician on the floor. I wasn't just a manual laborer pressing green buttons anymore. I fully understood the complex programmable logic controllers and internal circuitry that dictated the entire facility's output. And that reality made a man named Derek absolutely furious. Derek was a senior line operator who had been at the plant for over 15 consecutive years. He was the kind of miserable, insecure worker who firmly believed that sheer seniority entitled him to respect, even though he spent a large portion of his daily shifts hiding in the break room or smoking cigarettes behind the loading docks. He had watched with growing resentment as the plant supervisors began coming to my station to ask for my input on efficiency blockades. He saw that I was able to diagnose and fix minor hydraulic jams in minutes before the official maintenance crew could even pack their bags. To Derek, my work ethic was an insulting reminder of his own laziness. On a suffocatingly hot Thursday afternoon, the plant was under immense pressure to finalize a massive, high-priority shipment of specialized mechanical components for our corporation's largest international client. The contract had a strict deadline, and any delay would result in tens of thousands of dollars in immediate legal penalties for the facility. Suddenly, without any warning, the primary automated barcode scanning array on Line 3 went into a catastrophic failure loop. The massive conveyor belt ground to a violent, screeching halt. Red emergency strobe lights began flashing across the ceiling, accompanied by a loud, piercing warning horn. The entire production floor devolved into instant chaos. Derek, who was officially assigned to manage that specific line, completely panicked. He began screaming profanities at the young interns, violently kicking the steel base of the scanning stand, and loudly proclaiming that a random software virus had wiped the mainframe. When he saw the general manager walking toward the line, Derek's face twisted, and he pointed a greasy finger directly at me. Nathan was messing around near the main control panel during the morning shift change. Derek yelled over the sound of the alarms, his voice filled with venom. I told him explicitly to stay away from the optical sensors, but he wouldn't listen. This is entirely his fault. The plant's general manager, Harrison, was a notoriously sharp, no-nonsense executive who had run manufacturing facilities all across the country for 30 years. He stormed down the concrete aisle, his face dark with anger. Maintenance just told me it will take at least 2 hours to get a corporate software technician to remote into the mainframe. Harrison barked, ignoring Derek and looking at the stalled line. If these components aren't scanned and loaded onto the shipping trucks by 5 p.m., we lose this account. Who authorized anyone to touch this panel? 2 years prior, the old, insecure version of Nathan would have stuttered, turned bright red, and desperately tried to plead his innocence while looking completely guilty under the pressure. But the man standing there today had spent hundreds of hours in dark classrooms mastering this exact machinery. I stepped past Derek, walked right up to Harrison, and looked him directly in the eye. "The mainframe isn't crashed, sir," I said, my voice completely calm and level. "Give me exactly 5 minutes with the terminal." Harrison narrowed his eyes at me, studying my face for a long, tense second. Derek began laughing nervously in the background, shouting that I was going to permanently break $1 million system. "Do it," Harrison commanded flatly, cutting Derek off with a sharp wave of his hand. "You have 5 minutes, Gentry. If it goes completely dead, you're fired before you walk out the door." I immediately walked over to the primary terminal housing. I pulled a small digital multimeter and a specialized diagnostic cable from my work pocket. I completely bypassed the locked user interface screen, opened the raw command prompt of the system, and began typing lines of code. I knew exactly what had occurred. Derek had intentionally reached behind the sensor housing and manually altered the optical frequency alignment to create an artificial data loop, fully intending to pretend he fixed it later to look like a hero. But he didn't realize his actions would trigger a hard systemic lockdown. I quickly rewrote the localized sensor parameters, cleared the corrupted data cache from the server, and executed a forced manual restart of the line's internal logic board. It didn't take 5 minutes. It took me exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds. The flashing red strobe lights instantly shut off. The piercing warning horn fell dead. The massive conveyor belt gave a low hum and lurch forward, and the automated scanners began cheerfully chiming in rapid succession as hundreds of component boxes began rolling seamlessly through the gate. The entire production floor was dead silent. The operators stared at the moving line in absolute shock. Derek stood there, his jaw completely open, his face draining of all color as he stared at the screen. Harrison looked at the rolling line, then looked down at the command prompt on the monitor, and then turned around to face me. His expression was completely unreadable. "Gentry, my office. Right now," Harrison said, turning on his heel and walking toward the iron stairs. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and followed him up to the glass executive suite that overlooked the entire facility. I fully expected to receive a formal written reprimand for bypassing corporate security protocols. Harrison sat down behind his massive desk, crossed his arms, and stared at me for a long time. "You are an hourly assembly line worker, Nathan," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a low, serious tone. "How did you learn to manually override and reprogram a Siemens industrial logic controller in the middle of a systemic lockdown?" "I finished my advanced certification in industrial systems operations and corporate management at the Technical College next month, sir," I answered, keeping my posture straight and my voice respectful. "I've been attending classes 4 nights a week for the past 2 years. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, genuine smile appearing on his usually stern face. "You've been working at this plant for over 4 years, he said, looking over my employment file. "You have a perfect attendance record. You just saved this company a multi-million-dollar international account in 3 minutes while my senior operators were kicking the machinery like children. Why the hell are you still wearing greasy overalls on the floor, Nathan?" "Because no one has ever offered me an opportunity to wear anything else, sir," I replied honestly. "And I don't beg for advancements." Harrison let out a loud, booming laugh. "Effective this coming Monday, you are officially off the factory floor," he said, pulling out a promotion document and signing it with a heavy pen. "You are the new lead systems coordinator for the entire automated wing. It comes with a formal title, your own private office with working air conditioning, and an immediate 22% salary advancement." I didn't cheer. I didn't break down. I simply shook his hand, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out. That promotion was the very first major milestone of my adult life that wasn't immediately poisoned by my mother's disapproval or my siblings' arrogance. But it wasn't the greatest reward I received that year. Because of my new administrative role, I was required to coordinate daily inventory logs directly with the material tracking department. And that is exactly where I met Clara. Clara was entirely different from any woman I had ever encountered. She didn't care about designer labels, social media clout, or country club gossip. She was incredibly sharp, wore sensible work boots, kept a black marker tucked into her hair, and possessed an absolute zero-tolerance policy for corporate nonsense. The very first morning I walked into her inventory cage to request a system audit, she didn't even look up from her digital tablet. "If you're the new systems guy Harrison hired, go fix the handheld laser scanners in loading dock 4 first," she snapped, her voice crisp and commanding. "I am completely tired of logging 30 duplicate item entries every shift just because the engineering department doesn't know how to properly calibrate a laser sensor." I stood there staring at her for a moment, completely caught off guard, and then a massive grin spread across my face. "Good morning, I'm Nathan," I said. She finally paused, lifted her head, and locked her piercing, beautiful brown eyes directly onto mine. She didn't smile back, but her eyes softened just a fraction. "Fix the scanners, Nathan," she said flatly. I fell completely in love with her right then and there. Clara was fiercely independent, authentic, and entirely unimpressed by corporate titles or wealth. We began spending our lunch breaks together in the quiet corner of the employee cafeteria. There was no fake corporate flirting, no games, just 2 hardworking people eating sandwiches out of plastic containers, talking about supply chain logistics, and sharing a mutual respect for honest work. Slowly, the thick protective walls I had built around my heart after my family's betrayal began to crumble. One evening in late October, a violent autumn thunderstorm hit our town right at the exact moment the shift ended. Clara had taken the public bus to work that morning, and the rain was coming down in blinding torrents. I pulled my old Ford truck up to the curb of the inventory exit, rolled down the window, and offered to drive her home. When we finally pulled up to the curb of her small apartment building, she looked at me through the dim, warm light of the dashboard. "Do you want to come inside?" she asked softly, wiping a stray drop of rain from her cheek. "I made a massive pot of homemade chili yesterday. It always tastes infinitely better on the second day." There were no mind games, no hidden agendas, no pretension. It was just 2 real people who understood the exhausting weight of long hours, the comfort of good food, and the profound beauty of shared silence. 3 months later, I moved my things into her apartment. Exactly 6 months after that, on a crisp Tuesday morning, we walked down to the local county courthouse. We paid the administrative fee, signed our marriage license, and got married right there in front of a justice of the peace. She wore a simple, elegant white dress she bought on sale, and I wore the only decent suit I owned. There were no expensive venues, no arrogant family members, no country club drama. We celebrated our marriage by ordering a large pizza and sharing a $10 bottle of red wine while sitting on our living room floor. As we were eating, Clara reached over, placed her hand over mine, and looked at me with deep sincerity. "Nathan, do your mother and siblings even know that you got married today?" she asked softly. I took a sip of my wine, looked at her beautiful face, and slowly shook my head. "No," I told her, and for the first time in my life, my chest didn't feel tight when I spoke about them. "They don't even know that I am still breathing on this earth." She squeezed my hand tightly. "Are you truly at peace with that?" "I have never experienced more profound, absolute peace in my entire existence than I do right now at this table with you," I said, and it was the most honest sentence I had ever spoken. I was successfully building an entirely new life completely in the shadows. I was rising rapidly through the corporate ranks of the corporation, my salary was growing, and I had a remarkable woman who loved me for my character, not my job title. As far as Brenda, Gavin, Monica, and Fiona knew, I was still just a pathetic, low-class factory worker rotting away in shameful obscurity. But a fire that burns that bright in the dark cannot remain hidden forever. I was about to step completely out of the shadows, and when the light finally hit my new life, the absolute blast radius of my success was going to permanently shatter my mother's perfect world into a million pieces. The next 4 years of my life became a masterclass in silent, absolute, and relentless execution. While my mother, Brenda, and my siblings, Gavin, Monica, and Fiona, spent their days desperately clinging to their crumbling social status, attending country club brunches, and masking their financial rot with designer clothes and fake smiles. I was quietly building an absolute industrial empire. I did not take vacations. I did not buy flashy sports cars to impress people I hated. I drove the same reliable, dented Ford truck, lived in the same modest apartment with my wife, Clara, for the first 2 years of our marriage, and poured every single dollar of my rapidly increasing salary into aggressive index funds, a maximum contribution 401k, and quiet, long-term real estate investments. My career trajectory at the manufacturing corporation was completely unprecedented in the company's 50-year history. Harrison, the general manager who had recognized my potential and given me my first real break, eventually stepped down to accept a high-level corporate board position at the headquarters in Chicago. Before he left, he personally recommended me to the executive board to take his place as the regional manager. At 27 years old, I officially became the director of regional operations. I traded my grease-stained, heavy industrial overalls for custom-tailored charcoal suits. My hourly factory wage was replaced by a massive executive salary, performance-based bonuses, and a highly lucrative stock option package that placed me firmly in the top tier of the region's wealth. I went from being the guy who crawled under dangerously hot conveyor belts to fix hydraulic leaks in the middle of the night to the man who sat in high-security glass boardrooms negotiating multi-million-dollar supply chain contracts with international logistics firms. Clara was equally successful. She was promoted to the head of the regional logistics division. We eventually bought a beautiful, expansive piece of secluded real estate on the edge of the county, far removed from the toxic, gossiping suburbs where I grew up. We built a custom home surrounded by tall, ancient pine trees. Our life was incredibly peaceful, grounded, and entirely our own. I had completely detached from the Gentry family name. I had not spoken a single word, sent a single text, or received a single update regarding my mother, Gavin, Monica, or Fiona in over 4 years. I lived under the assumption that they were still successfully maintaining their perfect, wealthy lives, looking down on the rest of the world, just as they had always done. But reality has a very sharp, unforgiving way of catching up with people who live far beyond their means. During my 4th year as director, our manufacturing corporation finalized a massive, aggressive operational expansion initiative. We needed to drastically increase our shipping and receiving footprint, which meant we had to acquire a massive, contiguous block of local real estate that bordered our current facility. The corporate board placed me, as the director of regional operations, entirely in charge of the land acquisition project. I was handed a massive budget and a team of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in the state to buy out the residential neighborhood that sat directly against our southern fence line. I sat in my corner office on a Tuesday morning, drinking black coffee and reviewing the thick, leather-bound folder of property deeds our legal team had compiled. As I flipped through the pages of targeted addresses, my heart suddenly stopped dead in my chest. There it was, printed in stark, unforgiving black ink on a county assessor's document. The address listed for acquisition was my childhood home. The neighborhood we were planning to bulldoze for our new, state-of-the-art shipping logistics center was my mother's beloved, prestigious HOA community. I leaned back in my Italian leather executive chair and stared at the document, the silence of my office suddenly feeling heavy. I pulled up the comprehensive financial background check our lawyers had run on the property to determine our initial buyout offer. What I saw on that computer screen completely destroyed the illusion of the flawless Gentry family that had been pounded into my brain since childhood. My mother's house was completely underwater. She had taken out a massive, predatory second mortgage to fund her luxury lifestyle, and she was currently 4 months behind on payments. The bank had already initiated the early stages of foreclosure. But that was just the superficial layer of the collapse. I looked at the public legal records attached to my siblings. Gavin, the golden child, the brilliant cardiologist, was drowning in absolute ruin. He had gone through an incredibly toxic, highly publicized divorce. His ex-wife had taken him to the cleaners in a brutal, multi-year custody battle over their 2 children, resulting in Gavin paying astronomical, lifelong alimony and child support. To make matters infinitely worse, Gavin was currently the primary defendant in a massive, landmark medical malpractice lawsuit that had completely frozen his assets and severely damaged his professional reputation. He was entirely broke, living in a cheap rental apartment and facing a potential loss of his medical license. Monica had been laid off from her tech firm during a massive corporate downsizing 2 years prior and had completely drained her meager savings trying to maintain the appearance of a wealthy software engineer while secretly working freelance gig jobs that barely covered her rent. Fiona had dropped out of her marketing program entirely and was living back at home, spending her days posting heavily filtered, fake photos on social media while ignoring the stack of collection agency letters piling up in the mailbox. The successful children were a complete, catastrophic failure. My mother was sitting on a mountain of debt, desperately waiting for a miracle to save her from public humiliation and total bankruptcy. And then, the universe handed her what she thought was a miracle. Our manufacturing corporation sent out formal, highly lucrative buyout offer letters to all the homeowners in her neighborhood. We were offering 20% above the current market value, paid entirely in cash, to expedite the land acquisition process. For my mother, this corporate buyout was her ultimate salvation. It would instantly clear her massive debts, pay off Gavin's brutal lawyer fees, and leave her with enough cash to maintain her arrogant facade for a few more years. But there was a massive legal catch, a catch that she absolutely loathed. Because my father had originally purchased that house long before their marriage, and because of a strange, archaic clause in the original county property deed regarding his estate, the title transfer required the physical, notarized signature of all living direct heirs to formally release the property to a commercial entity. She needed my signature to sell the house. She needed the factory worker she had publicly disowned 4 years ago to sign away his legal rights so she could collect her millions. I knew exactly what she was going to do. I waited for her to make the first move. 2 days later, a thick, heavy, official-looking envelope arrived at my old apartment address, which was fortunately forwarded to my office by my old landlord. It was a highly aggressive, condescending legal summons from my mother's desperate real estate attorney, demanding my presence at a formal mandatory mediation meeting the following Friday to sign a quitclaim deed. Included in the legal packet was a handwritten note from Brenda. It was dripping with fake, condescending sweetness that I could smell through the paper. "Nathan, I know we have had our silly little misunderstandings in the past," she wrote. "But family is family. I am currently finalizing a massive, multi-million-dollar real estate transaction with a major corporate buyer. I need you to come to my lawyer's office on Friday to sign a simple piece of paper releasing your old claim to the house. Since I know you are likely still struggling on your pathetic little factory wages, I am generously willing to write you a personal check for $1,000 out of my own pocket for your time. Do not ruin this for us. We're something clean." I read the note twice. A slow, cold, and razor-sharp smile spread across my face. I looked out the massive glass window of my office, overlooking the sprawling, bustling factory floor below. She honestly still believed I was a greasy mechanic struggling to pay rent. She believed she held all the power. She believed she could summon me like a disobedient dog, toss me a bone, and use my signature to save her crumbling empire. I picked up my desk phone and called my lead corporate counsel, a ruthless, brilliant lawyer named Marcus. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice entirely steady, "I need you to draft a very specific corporate response regarding the Gentry property acquisition on Elm Street, and clear your schedule for this Friday afternoon. We are going to a family meeting." The law office of my mother's attorney was located in the wealthy, historic district of the city. It was the kind of desperate old money establishment that featured dark mahogany conference tables, heavy velvet curtains, and an overwhelming smell of expensive floor wax and stale arrogance. It was designed entirely to intimidate people who didn't have money, a trap for the vulnerable. I arrived exactly 10 minutes late, just to set the tone. I did not wear one of my tailored executive suits. I wanted to give them exactly the version of me they expected to see. I wore a plain, slightly faded black t-shirt, a pair of worn denim jeans, and the same heavy steel-toed boots I used to wear on the assembly line. I left my expensive watch at home, keeping the charade alive until the final second. When I opened the heavy oak door and walked into the main conference room, The entire room went completely silent. My mother, Brenda, was sitting at the head of the table. She was clutching a designer handbag that I now knew she bought on a credit card she couldn't pay off. Her face was tight, covered in a heavy layer of makeup designed to hide the immense stress of her impending financial ruin. Gavin sat to her right. He looked absolutely terrible. The divorce and the massive malpractice lawsuit had aged him 10 years. His hair was thinning. His suit jacket hung loosely on his frame, and the trademark arrogant smirk that used to define his entire personality was completely gone, replaced by a deep, hollow desperation. Monica and Fiona were sitting on the opposite side, aggressively glaring at me as if my mere presence was an insult to their existence. At the far end of the table sat their attorney, a balding, aggressive-looking man named Mr. Vance. "Well, look who finally decided to join the real world," Gavin sneered, his voice dripping with his usual condescension, though it lacked its old power. "Nice of you to take a break from sweeping floors to grace us with your presence, Nathan." I didn't say a single word to him. I pulled out a heavy leather chair at the opposite end of the mahogany table and sat down. I leaned back, crossed my arms, and looked directly at my mother, waiting for the show to begin. "Let us make this incredibly quick, Nathan," Brenda said, her tone sharp and dismissive. "I have a very busy afternoon scheduled. As I explained in my note, I am currently selling the family estate to Apex Manufacturing Solutions. They are a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporation, and they are buying out the entire neighborhood. Mr. Vance has prepared a standard quitclaim deed. All you have to do is pick up that pen, sign your name on the dotted line, and renounce any absurd legal claim you think you have to your father's old equity." Mr. Vance slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished table toward me. He placed a heavy, gold-plated pen right on top of the paper, like an offering to a peasant. "In exchange for your total cooperation today, Mr. Gentry," Mr. Vance said in a deep, theatrical voice, "your mother has generously agreed to provide you with a one-time, tax-free cash gift of exactly $1,000. Given your current employment status as a manual laborer, I assume this financial windfall will be quite beneficial for you." I looked down at the gold pen. Then I looked up at Gavin. "Is the $1,000 coming out of your account, Gavin?" I asked calmly. "Or is it completely tied up in your massive malpractice lawsuit and your brutal child custody payments?" The entire room instantly froze. The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Gavin's face turned paper white. His jaw dropped open, and he stared at me as if I had just struck him with a baseball bat. "How do you know about that?" Gavin whispered, his voice trembling with genuine shock. I ignored him and turned my eyes to Monica. "And what about you, Monica? Are you going to chip in for my $1,000 bonus using the gig economy money you've been making since you got fired 2 years ago?" Monica physically flinched, shrinking back into her heavy leather chair, completely unable to make eye contact with me. Brenda slammed her manicured hands down on the mahogany table, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "How dare you walk into this room and speak to your successful siblings that way?" Brenda shouted, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "You are a disgusting, pathetic factory worker. You know absolutely nothing about the complexities of our lives. You are entirely beneath us. Now pick up that pen, sign the damn document, take your pathetic little check, and get out of my sight before I have Mr. Vance revoke the financial offer entirely." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show a single ounce of emotion. I simply reached into my back pocket, pulled out my cell phone, placed it on the table, and sent a single text message. 10 seconds later, the heavy oak door of the conference room swung open. My lead corporate counsel, Marcus, walked into the room. He was wearing an immaculate $4,000 bespoke suit. He carried a heavy, locked titanium briefcase. Behind him stood 2 massive corporate security guards wearing earpieces and dark suits. Mr. Vance instantly stood up, his face registering total confusion. "Excuse me, who are you? This is a private, closed-door legal mediation. You cannot be in here." Marcus completely ignored the frantic lawyer. He walked directly over to where I was sitting. He placed the titanium briefcase on the table, clicked open the heavy steel locks, and pulled out a massive stack of highly classified corporate contracts, stamped with the official seal of Apex Manufacturing Solutions. Marcus turned to me and gave a deep, respectful nod. "I apologize for the slight delay, Director Gentry," Marcus said loudly, ensuring his voice carried to every single corner of the silent room. "I brought the final acquisition redline documents exactly as you requested. The Executive Board has already pre-approved your final decision regarding the Elm Street properties." Director Gentry. The words hung in the air like a detonated explosive. Brenda stopped breathing. Gavin stared at Marcus, then looked back at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. Mr. Vance slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his aggressive demeanor completely evaporating as he recognized the corporate logo on Marcus's documents. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany table. I looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "You told me 4 years ago that my life choices were too embarrassing to include in this family," I said, my voice completely cold and level, stripped of all anger and all mercy. "You told me you only respected true ambition. You threw me away because you thought working in a factory made me garbage." I reached out and pulled the quitclaim deed that Mr. Vance had prepared toward me. I picked up the gold pen, but I didn't sign my name. I drew a massive, thick black line straight through the entire document, tearing the expensive paper. "But there is a funny thing about working in a factory, Brenda," I continued, holding her panicked gaze. "If you actually put your head down, shut your mouth, and learn how the machines work, eventually, they let you run the entire building. I am not a mechanic anymore. I am the Director of Regional Operations for Apex Manufacturing Solutions. My base executive salary is higher than Gavin's was even before he destroyed his medical career. And I am the sole executive officer in charge of the land acquisition project for your neighborhood." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking violently. "No, that is impossible. You are lying. You are just a line worker." Marcus stepped forward and handed Brenda a thick, legally binding corporate document. "This is an official notice of withdrawal," Marcus said coldly. "Apex Manufacturing Solutions is officially revoking its cash buyout offer for your specific property on Elm Street. Director Gentry has determined that your parcel of land is not strategically necessary for our logistics expansion. We are buying the houses around you, but we are leaving your property completely untouched." The realization of what I had just done hit the room like a physical shockwave. By refusing to buy her house, I was not just denying her a massive financial windfall. I was trapping her in a house she could not afford, surrounded by a massive, loud, industrial shipping zone that would instantly destroy her property value forever. She was going to face total foreclosure. She was going to lose everything. She was going to be completely bankrupt, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. I stood up from my chair. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I just looked at the strangers sitting across from me, realizing they possessed absolutely no power over me anymore. "Enjoy the foreclosure, Brenda," I said quietly. "And Gavin, good luck with the malpractice lawsuit. I hear the legal fees are absolutely brutal." I turned my back on them and walked out of the room, leaving the absolute ruins of the Gentry family behind me in the deafening silence. The immediate aftermath of that conference room meeting was a masterclass in watching a toxic hierarchy completely collapse in on itself. As I walked down the heavy carpeted hallway toward the elevators, I could hear the muffled, chaotic shouting echoing from behind the closed oak doors. I heard Gavin desperately screaming at Mr. Vance, demanding to know if what I had just done was legally permissible. I heard Monica sobbing loudly, but the most distinct sound was my mother. She wasn't yelling in anger anymore. She was wailing. It was the high-pitched, desperate sound of a narcissist who had just realized that the mirror they used to admire themselves had been permanently shattered into a million pieces. By Friday of the following week, the absolute reality of their situation had fully materialized. Our corporation officially closed on the surrounding properties in her neighborhood, effectively turning her pristine, gated HOA community into a highly active, heavy-duty industrial construction zone. Bulldozers rolled in. The value of her house plummeted overnight to a fraction of its original worth, making it completely impossible for her to even sell the property to a private buyer to cover her massive debts. The bank aggressively accelerated the foreclosure process. That was when the desperation finally broke through her pride. It was a Tuesday afternoon. It was pouring rain, the kind of heavy, relentless downpour that turns the sky a dark, bruised purple. I was sitting at my executive desk on the top floor of the Apex corporate headquarters, finalizing a logistics contract with Clara on a secure conference call. My desk phone buzzed. It was the head of building security at the front desk lobby. Director Gentry, the security chief said, his voice laced with professional hesitation. "Sir, there is an older woman down here in the main lobby causing a massive disturbance. She is completely soaked from the rain. She is demanding to be allowed up to the executive suites. She claims she is your mother, Brenda Gentry." I paused. I looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my office, watching the heavy rain violently wash over the city skyline. I felt a strange, profound sense of absolute calm wash over my chest. For years ago, the mere mention of her name would have sent my heart rate skyrocketing into a panic. Now I felt absolutely nothing. She was just a stranger standing in a lobby. Did she schedule an appointment with my executive assistant? I asked, my voice completely flat and professional. "No, sir," the security chief replied. "She has no appointment. We asked her to leave the premises, but she is currently crying hysterically near the turnstiles, telling everyone in the lobby that her son is going to save her house and pay her legal bills. She refuses to step outside. Would you like me to send her up to your floor?" I pictured her down there, the woman who had proudly typed out a message to the entire family, banning me from a holiday dinner because the grease on my hands embarrassed her in front of her country club friends. The woman who had deployed Aunt Diana as a spy to mock my pain. The woman who had watched me sacrifice my entire college fund and my youth to save her mortgage, only to treat me like a contagious disease. She had completely discarded me when she thought I was useless, and now that she was drowning in the consequences of her own arrogance, she expected me to be her life raft. "No," I said clearly into the receiver. "I do not know that woman. Please have security escort her off the corporate property immediately. If she refuses to leave the lobby, or if she attempts to harass the staff, you are fully authorized to call the local police and press formal trespassing charges on behalf of the company." "Understood, Director," the chief said, the hesitation completely gone from his voice. "We will handle it right now." I hung up the phone. I stood up from my desk and walked slowly over to the glass window. I looked straight down at the street level 30 floors below. A few minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the main lobby swung open. I watched as two large corporate security guards firmly escorted my mother out onto the wet concrete sidewalk. She was completely frantic. Even from that massive distance, I could see her wildly waving her arms, pointing desperately up at the towering glass building, screaming something into the pouring rain. Her expensive designer handbag slipped from her shoulder and fell directly into a deep puddle of muddy water. She fell to her knees on the sidewalk, clutching her face, sobbing uncontrollably as the security guards stood like stone statues, blocking the entrance to the building. I stood there and watched her for a long time. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the sudden, cinematic urge to rush down the elevator, pull her into my arms, and forgive her for decades of abuse. The world tries to tell you that family is an unbreakable bond, that you must always forgive the people who share your blood, no matter how deeply they cut you. But watching her kneel in the rain, I realized that blood only makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and fundamental human decency are what make you a family. She had possessed none of those things. She stayed on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, completely soaked, waiting for a savior who was never going to come down. Finally, completely defeated and utterly broken, she slowly stood up, picked up her ruined bag from the mud, and walked away into the gray, freezing rain. I turned away from the window, walked back to my desk, and went back to work. I never saw Brenda, Gavin, Monica, or Fiona ever again. The foreclosure went through a month later, and the Golden family was completely scattered to the wind. That evening, after the chaotic events at the corporate office, I drove my truck back to the quiet, secluded piece of real estate that Clara and I had built our lives upon. The heavy rain had finally stopped, leaving the air smelling fresh, clean, and filled with the scent of wet pine needles. When I opened the front door, the house was warm and deeply inviting. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air. Clara was standing in the kitchen, wearing comfortable sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, laughing at something on the television while she stirred a pot on the stove. I walked up behind her, wrapped my arms securely around her waist, and rested my chin on her shoulder. She leaned back into me, completely relaxed, and placed her hand over mine. "How was your day at the office, Mr. Director?" she asked, turning her head to give me a soft, knowing smile. "Did you finalize the land acquisition paperwork?" "It is completely done," I whispered, pulling her just a little bit closer. "It is finally over. The chapter is completely closed." Later that night, we sat together on the back porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, drinking hot coffee and looking out at the dark, silent trees outlining our property. It was in that profound, beautiful silence that I fully understood the true magnitude of what I had actually achieved. The greatest victory of my entire life was not the massive executive salary. It was not the high-ranking corporate promotion, the stock options, or the power to legally dismantle the people who had abused me. Those things were just tools. The real victory was the absolute, impenetrable peace I had meticulously built for myself. When you grow up in a deeply toxic family, you are constantly conditioned to believe that your entire worth is strictly tied to how much pain you are willing to absorb for them. You are taught that setting basic boundaries is a selfish act of betrayal. My mother and my siblings demanded that I set myself on fire purely to keep them warm, and when I finally stopped handing them the matches, they labeled me the villain of their story. But I realized that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. Sometimes the most powerful, necessary thing you can possibly do for your own survival is to stop arguing, stop explaining your worth, and simply walk away in complete silence. My mother tried to use my blue-collar job as a weapon to destroy my self-esteem. She tried to make me feel like I was absolute trash. Instead, I used that exact same job as the unbreakable foundation to build a fortress so incredibly high that she could never even reach the front gates. I did not let her cruelty turn me into a bitter, angry man. I funneled every single ounce of that rejection into pure, unadulterated ambition. And when I finally reached the top of the mountain, I didn't reach down to pull my abusers up with me. I left them entirely at the bottom, exactly where they chose to put themselves. Today, Clara and I are expecting our first child, a little boy, and as I sit here looking at the ultrasound photos on my desk, I make a silent, unbreakable promise to him. I promise that he will never have to earn his place at my dinner table. I promise that he will never have to sacrifice his entire future just to prove his loyalty. He will never know the cold, calculating conditions of the Gentry family. He will only know absolute, unconditional love. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I know it was a heavy one, but I hope it serves as a massive wake-up call for anyone out there who is currently pouring their heart, their money, and their soul into a family that only views them as a convenient utility. You are not required to tolerate abuse just because you share the same DNA. Your absolute highest priority in this life is protecting your own peace and building your own future. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family members? Have you ever had to walk away and cut ties just to survive? Share your story in the comments below. I read absolutely every single one of them, and your courage might be the exact thing someone else needs to hear today. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.